Welcome, dear listener, to another journey through the corridors of time. Tonight, we invite you to step away from the comfort of your modern world and into the marble halls of ancient Rome, where the flickering light of oil lamps casts long shadows across preparations that would make even the bravest soul tremble with apprehension. You might imagine a Roman wedding as a grand celebration, filled with joy and merriment, perhaps similar to the ceremonies we know today. But as you settle into your comfortable space, allow yourself to consider a different reality, one where marriage was not merely a union of hearts, but a calculated political maneuver, a public spectacle, and for many young brides, a source of genuine terror. The Romans, for all their engineering marvels and legal innovations, approached marriage with a complexity that would seem both familiar and utterly foreign to our modern sensibilities. The wedding night, in particular, held layers of meaning that extended far beyond the private moment between two individuals. It was a culmination of months of negotiation, a public declaration of family alliances, and often the first real encounter between strangers who would spend their lives together. Imagine yourself transported to the bustling streets of Rome during the height of the empire, where the air carries the scent of incense and cooking fires, where the sounds of preparation echo through villa courtyards, and where young women, some barely past childhood, prepare for a night that would irrevocably change their lives. The weight of expectation, the burden of family honor, and the uncertainty of what lay ahead created an atmosphere thick with tension that no amount of ceremonial pageantry could fully mask. As we explored this fascinating and often troubling aspect of Roman society, you'll discover that the wedding night was merely the final act in a complex drama that began long before the bride ever set foot in her marriage chamber. The rituals, the expectations, the very real fears that accompanied this transition from maiden to wife reveal much about Roman values, gender roles, and the intricate web of power that governed their society. So close your eyes, if you will, and let us guide you through this historical landscape where love was often secondary to duty, where young women faced their wedding nights with trepidation, and where the very foundations of Roman society were built upon these carefully orchestrated unions that would determine the fate of families, fortunes, and empires. The morning of a Roman wedding dawned with an atmosphere that hung heavy with anticipation, not unlike the thick air before a thunderstorm. Imagine yourself awakening in a Roman villa where the household slaves had been bustling about since before sunrise, their sandaled feet creating a constant rhythm against the marble floors. The scent of burning incense mingles with the aroma of honey cakes being prepared in the kitchen, while the soft murmur of women's voices drifts through the corridors like a continuous prayer. You would find yourself in the bride's chamber, where the young woman, perhaps no more than 14 or 15 years old, sits motionless as her female relatives and slaves attend to her preparation. Her face bears the pallor of sleepless nights, for she has likely spent weeks anticipating this day with a mixture of curiosity and dread. The ritual bathing that precedes the ceremony involves more than simple cleansing. It represents a symbolic washing away of her childhood, a preparation for the transformation that awaits her. The bride's mother moves about the room with practiced efficiency, her own memories of wedding anxiety carefully concealed beneath layers of maternal authority. She oversees the application of cosmetics, the subtle rouge that brings color to pale cheeks, the kohl that darkens the eyes, the perfumed oils that will scent the bride's skin throughout the long day ahead. Each touch of the cosmetic brush, each adjustment of the wedding garments carries the weight of generations of women who have undergone this same ritual transformation. The wedding dress itself tells a story of symbolism and tradition. The tunica recta, woven in the ancient manner on an upright loom, represents the bride's connection to the domestic virtues expected of Roman wives. The flame-colored veil, the flamium, casts an otherworldly glow over her features, transforming her into something between mortal woman and religious offering. The girdle, tied with the knot of Hercules, serves as both decorative element and symbolic barrier, one that only her husband would be permitted to untie, marking the final surrender of her virginity and independence. As the preparations continue, you might notice the subtle signs of the bride's inner turmoil. Her hands tremble slightly as the ceremonial jewelry is placed upon her, not from cold, but from the nervous energy that courses through her young body. The wedding crown, heavy with its metal flowers and herbs, seems to press down upon her, like the weight of her new responsibilities. Eyes, framed by the elaborate hairstyle that took hours to complete, tilt occasionally toward the window, as if seeking escape from the inexorable march of time toward her fate. The groom's preparations, taking place in another part of the villa, follow their own ritualistic patterns. Unlike the bride, who may have seen her future husband only a handful of times during the betrothal negotiations, the groom approaches this day with the confidence of one who understands his role in the social machinery of Roman life. He is typically older, perhaps in his 20s or 30s, already established in his career and social position. His preparations involve the donning of his finest toga, the careful arrangement of his hair, and the receipt of advice from his male relatives about the duties and privileges of husbandhood. The contrast between the bride's chamber and the groom's quarters reveals much about the gendered nature of Roman marriage, how the women's space hums with nervous energy and whispered concerns. The men's area resonates with congratulations and practical discussions about property, politics, and the expansion of family influence. The groom receives guidance about the wedding night itself, but this instruction focuses primarily on the assertion of husbandly authority rather than consideration for his bride's emotional state. As the morning progresses, the wedding guests begin to arrive, and the villa fills with the sounds of social interaction. The bride, now fully prepared, must endure the scrutiny of relatives, family, friends, and political allies who have come to witness this union. Each visitor examines her appearance, comments on her beauty or demeanor, and offers advice that ranges from the practical to the ominous. The weight of their expectations settles upon her shoulders like a heavy cloak, for she understands that her performance as a wife will reflect not only upon herself, but upon her entire family's honor. The taking of the auspices, the reading of omens to determine the god's favor, adds another layer of tension to the proceedings. The augur, a religious official trained in the interpretation of divine signs, examines the flight patterns of birds, the behavior of sacrificial animals, and other natural phenomena to determine whether the marriage has the blessing of the gods. A negative reading could potentially postpone the ceremony, but more often, signs are interpreted favorably, regardless of what the augur might actually observe. The bride watches these proceedings with particular intensity, perhaps hoping for a divine intervention that might delay or prevent the consummation of her marriage. The ceremony itself unfolds with the precision of a military operation, each element carefully choreographed to demonstrate the family's wealth, status, and devotion to traditional Roman values. The exchange of vows, the joining of hands, the sharing of cake, all these rituals serve to bind the couple, not only to each other, but to the complex web of social obligations that define Roman marriage. The bride's responses to the ceremonial questions are barely audible, her voice strained with the effort of maintaining composure while her world transforms around her. Throughout the celebration, the bride must navigate the delicate balance between appearing appropriately modest and demonstrating the social graces expected of her new position. She must smile at the appropriate moments, lower her eyes when modesty demands, and accept the congratulations of guests while internally preparing for the ordeal that awaits her when the celebrations finally end. The wedding feast, with its elaborate courses and flowing wine, serves as both celebration and delay, pushing the inevitable moment of the wedding night ever closer, while providing a temporary respite from its approach as the day wears on. The bride's anxiety becomes increasingly difficult to conceal, the laughter of the guests, the music of the hired entertainers, the general atmosphere of celebration. All of these elements seem to exist in a world separate from her own internal experience. She moves through the festivities like a performer in a play, executing her role with mechanical precision while her mind remains focused on the approaching darkness and the unknown experiences it will bring. As the sun begins its descent toward the horizon, painting the Roman sky in shades of amber and gold, the moment arrives that transforms celebration into something far more primal and unsettling. The deductio, the ritualistic procession that will carry the bride from her father's house to her new husband's home, represents one of the most psychologically complex aspects of Roman wedding tradition. Imagine yourself witnessing this ancient ceremony where the line between celebration and abduction becomes deliberately blurred, creating an atmosphere that would seem both festive and deeply disturbing to modern sensibilities. The procession begins with what appears to be a carefully choreographed struggle. The bride, who has spent the entire day in a state of mounting tension, must now perform the most challenging act of her wedding, the simulation of resistance to her removal from her childhood home. This mock reluctance serves multiple symbolic purposes. It demonstrates her modesty and attachment to her family, emphasizes the gravity of the transition she is about to undergo, and it reinforces the notion that marriage represents a form of sanctioned capture that has ancient roots in Roman cultural memory. You would observe the bride clinging to her mother's arms with what appears to be genuine desperation. Her carefully applied cosmetics, now streaked with tears that may or may not be entirely performative. The wailing of the women in her family fills the air, creating a soundscape that resembles mourning more than celebration. These lamentations serve a dual purpose. They honor the solemnity of the bride's transition from daughter to wife, while also providing an outlet for the very real grief that accompanies the loss of a young woman's independence and the security of her childhood. Home. The young men who formed the groom's party approached this ritual with a mixture of enthusiasm and practiced solemnity. They understand their role in this ancient drama to overcome the bride's resistance and the protective efforts of her female relatives, taking their collective strength in the inevitability of male authority. Their laughter and joking commentary provide a stark contrast to the tears of the women, revealing the gendered nature of Roman attitudes toward marriage and the different meanings it holds for men and women. The bride's symbolic resistance escalates as the moment of departure approaches. She must be physically separated from her mother's embrace, her feet literally lifted from the threshold of her father's house to prevent her from voluntarily crossing into her new life. This lifting serves both practical and spiritual purposes. It protects her new household from any potential curse that might result from her stumbling as she enters, while also emphasizing that she goes to her husband's home not by choice, but by the ancient right of husbandly authority. The torchlight procession that follows creates an otherworldly atmosphere as it winds through the Roman streets. The bride, now carried in a litter or walking supported by her attendants, becomes the centerpiece of a moving spectacle that draws the attention of every person they pass. The flames of the torches dance in the evening breeze, casting, shifting shadows that transform familiar streets into something mysterious and portentous. The scent of burning pitch mingles with the perfumes of the wedding party, creating an olfactory signature that will forever be associated in the bride's memory. With this night of transformation, the songs that accompany the procession reveal much about Roman attitudes toward marriage and sexuality. The Fescennine verses, with their deliberately crude and sexual content, serve to prepare the bride for the physical realities of marriage, while also providing a socially acceptable outlet for the community's body humor. These songs, which would be considered shocking in most other contexts, become not only permissible, but expected during the wedding procession. The bride must endure these explicit references to her upcoming sexual initiation while maintaining the composure expected of a Roman matron. The throwing of nuts and coins along the procession route creates moments of chaos that further disorient the bride while providing entertainment for the crowds that gather to watch. Children scramble to collect these tokens, their laughter and excited voices creating a carnival atmosphere that contrasts sharply with the bride's internal experience of dread and anticipation. The scattering of these small objects symbolizes the groom's transition from boyhood to manhood, the nuts representing the toys and games he must abandon in favor of adult responsibilities. As the procession makes its way through the city, the bride has ample time to contemplate what awaits her at its destination. The Roman streets, normally familiar and comforting, now seem threatening and alien in the flickering torchlight. Every step brings her closer to a life she has never experienced, in a house she has never seen, with a man she barely knows. The weight of her wedding crown seems to increase with each stride, pressing down upon her like the burden of her new obligations. The arrival at the groom's house marks the beginning of the final phase of the wedding ritual. The doorway, decorated with flowers and greenery, represents the threshold between her old life and new, between the safety of familiar surroundings and the unknown challenges that await within. The bride must be lifted over this threshold, her feet never touching the ground, to ensure that she brings no ill fortune to her new household. This moment of physical helplessness, suspended between earth and air, between past and future, symbolizes her complete dependence upon her husband's will and protection. The greeting that awaits her inside the house provides little comfort for her mounting anxiety. The groom's family, assembled to welcome their new member, scrutinizes her appearance and demeanor with the calculating eyes of those who have invested significant resources in this union. Their smiles may be welcoming, but their assessment is thorough and unforgiving. She must prove herself worthy of their acceptance while simultaneously preparing for the most intimate and frightening experience of her young life. The ritual purification that follows her arrival serves to mark her transition from her father's authority to her husband's protection. Water is poured over her hands while prayers are offered to the household gods, formally introducing her to the spiritual guardians of her new home. The oil that is applied to the doorposts symbolizes the abundance and fertility that her marriage is expected to bring to both families. Each ritual action builds upon the previous one, creating a chain of symbolic transformations that will culminate in the privacy of the marriage chamber. The bride's attendants, who have accompanied her throughout this journey, now begin their own preparations for departure. These women, who have served as her emotional support throughout the day, must now withdraw and leave her to face the wedding night alone with her husband. Their final ministrations, the adjustment of her veil, the smoothing of her dress, the whispered words of encouragement, carried the weight of feminine wisdom passed down through generations of Roman women who have endured this same experience. As the household prepares for the final phase of the wedding celebration, the bride finds herself in a state of suspension between worlds. She is no longer the daughter who awakened in her father's house that morning, but she has not yet become the wife she will be after tonight. This liminal state, neither child nor woman, neither virgin nor matron, creates a psychological vulnerability that intensifies every sensation and emotion. The very air seems charged with possibility and danger, while the familiar sounds of human activity take on an ominous quality that reflects her internal state of apprehension. The groom's house, now filled with the mingled scents of wedding feast and burning incense, becomes a theater for the final act of this ancient drama. Imagine yourself moving through these rooms where every surface bears the marks of careful preparation, the polished marble floors reflecting the dancing flames of oil lamps, the walls adorned with garlands of flowers whose perfume cannot quite mask the underlying tension that permeates the atmosphere. The bride, still wearing her flame-colored veil, moves through these spaces like a ghost haunting rooms she has never seen, her footsteps echoing with the hollow sound of inevitability. The wedding chamber itself has been prepared with the meticulous attention to detail that Romans devoted to all their important rituals. The bed, draped in fine linens and scattered with rose petals, represents both luxury and sacrifice, a place where pleasure and duty will intertwine in ways that the young bride can barely comprehend. The room's oil lamps have been arranged to cast a warm golden light that flatters the skin while creating shadows that seem to dance with their own mysterious intentions. Every element has been chosen to facilitate the transformation that must occur within these walls, where a virgin will become a wife and a girl will surrender her childhood forever. The female attendants who prepared the bride for this final ordeal work with practiced efficiency, their movements betraying the countless times they have performed these same ritual actions. They remove the wedding crown with its weight of flowers and metal, allowing the bride's hair to fall loose around her shoulders in a cascade that emphasizes her youth and vulnerability. The careful arrangement that took hours to create that mourning is now undone in moments, symbolizing the dismantling of her old identity in preparation for the construction of a new one. The removal of the wedding dress becomes a ceremony unto itself, a piece of clothing carrying symbolic weight. As it is folded and set aside, the tunica recta, woven according to ancient tradition, is replaced by a simple shift that offers little protection against the night's chill or the bride's mounting anxiety. It's a flame-colored veil, which has marked her as a bride throughout. The day is carefully arranged over a nearby chair, where it will remain as a reminder of this transformative night. The girdle of Hercules, with its complex knots, awaits the hands of her husband, who alone has the right to untie these bonds and claim the prize they protect. The bride's mother, if she has been permitted to attend this final preparation, offers words of counsel that have been passed down through generations of Roman women. Her advice encompasses both practical guidance about the physical aspects of marriage and philosophical wisdom about the patience and endurance required to navigate the complex emotional landscape of Roman matrimony. She speaks of the importance of submission, the necessity of producing heirs, and the satisfaction that comes from fulfilling one's duty to family and society. Yet beneath these traditional words, there may be glimpses of her own memories, her own fears, and perhaps her own regrets about the path her daughter must now follow. The ritual bathing that precedes the bride's final preparation serves multiple purposes beyond simple cleansing. The warm water, scented with oils and herbs, provides a few moments of comfort and relaxation before the ordeal to come. The attendant's gentle ministrations, the washing of her hair, the application of perfumed oils to her skin, the careful attention to every detail of her physical presentation create a cocoon of feminine care that will soon be replaced by the unfamiliar touch of masculine desire. This bathing ritual also serves to remove the dust and fatigue of the long day, ensuring that the bride appears fresh and appealing to her husband's eyes. The application of cosmetics for the wedding night requires a different approach than the morning's preparation. The colors must be subtle enough to appear natural in the intimate setting of the marriage chamber, yet bold enough to enhance her beauty in the flickering lamplight. The rouge that colors her cheeks must suggest the blush of modesty rather than the artifice of a skilled courtesan. The kohl that darkens her eyes must make them appear larger and more innocent, emphasizing her youth and purity. Every touch of the cosmetic brush serves to create a version of herself that will appeal to her husband's desires while maintaining the dignity expected of a Roman matron. The perfumed oils that are applied to her skin carry scents chosen specifically for their associations with femininity and fertility. The rose oil speaks of beauty and passion, while the myrrh suggests the exotic luxuries that wealthy Roman families could afford. The jasmine adds a note of sensuality that will linger in the air long after the ceremony is complete. These fragrances become part of her identity as a wife, marking her as her husband's possession, while also serving as a form of armor against the vulnerability of her situation. The final garment, a simple but elegant sleeping tunic made of the finest linen, represents the last barrier between the bride and her destiny. This garment, often a gift from her mother or grandmother, carries with it the blessings and hopes of the women who have worn similar garments on their own wedding nights. The fabric, soft against her skin, provides minimal physical protection, but serves as a psychological buffer against the complete exposure that awaits her. The ties that secured this garment will soon be loosened by unfamiliar hands, marking the final surrender of her virginity and independence. As the bride's preparation nears completion, the sounds of the continuing celebration filter through the walls of the marriage chamber. The laughter of the guests, the music of the hired entertainers, and the general atmosphere of festivities create a surreal backdrop to her private ordeal. This juxtaposition between public celebration and private anxiety emphasizes the isolating nature of her experience, surrounded by people who are celebrating her marriage, yet facing the most intimate and frightening moment of her life, essentially alone. The groom's own preparation takes place in another part of the house, where his male relatives and friends offer their final words of advice and encouragement. Their counsel focuses primarily on the assertion of husbandly authority, the importance of establishing dominance from the first night, and the practical aspects of claiming his conjugal rights. The tone of these conversations is markedly different from the feminine wisdom being shared in the bride's chamber, where the women speak of endurance and adaptation. The men discuss conquest and possession. This gender divide in wedding night preparation reflects the fundamental inequality that characterizes Roman marriage, where the husband's pleasure and satisfaction take precedence over the bride's comfort and emotional well-being. The ritual consumption of wine that precedes the couple's union serves both practical and symbolic purposes. The alcohol may help to ease the bride's nervousness while also loosening the inhibitions that might prevent her from fulfilling her marital duties. The sharing of a single cup emphasizes the unity that marriage is supposed to create, while the specific prayers that accompany this drinking invoke the gods' blessing upon their union and the fertility it is expected to produce. Yet for the bride, this wine may taste bitter with the knowledge of what is to come, its warmth providing little comfort against the chill of anticipation that runs through her veins. The departure of the female attendants marks the end of the bride's support system and the beginning of her solitary wait for her husband's arrival. These women, who have served as her companions and protectors throughout the day, must now withdraw and leave her to face the wedding night alone. Their final embraces and whispered words of encouragement carry the weight of feminine solidarity, a recognition that what she is about to experience is both a sacred duty and a profound trial. The closing of the chamber door behind them creates an acoustic barrier that emphasizes her isolation and vulnerability. The bride's final moments of solitude in the marriage chamber provide a space for reflection and preparation that she has not had throughout the entire day. Seated on the edge of the bed, surrounded by the luxury that marks her new status, she must reconcile herself to the reality of her situation. The child who played with dolls only months ago must now prepare to become a woman in the most fundamental sense. The daughter who has been protected and sheltered must now submit to the intimate touch of a man who remains essentially a stranger. The virgin who has been guarded and preserved must now surrender the very quality that made her valuable in the marriage market. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside the chamber door signals the end of her preparation time and the beginning of the final phase of her transformation. These footsteps, heavy with masculine purpose, carried with them the weight of Roman tradition, family expectation, and personal destiny. The bride's heart, which has been racing throughout the day, now seems to pause entirely as she prepares to meet her fate. The flame-colored veil, folded carefully on its chair, catches the lamplight one final time, a reminder of the bride she has been and the wife she is about to become. To understand the true complexity of Roman wedding nights, we must turn our attention to one of history's most documented and troubling examples, the marriage between Claudia Octavia and the future Emperor Nero in the year 53 CE. This union, arranged when Claudia was barely 13 years old, provides us with a window into the political machinations and personal tragedies that characterize aristocratic Roman marriages. Imagine yourself transported to the opulent halls of the imperial palace, where the scent of imported spices mingles with the tension of political calculation, and where a young girl's wedding night becomes a matter of state importance. Claudia Octavia, daughter of the Emperor Claudius, had lived her entire short life within the protective confines of the imperial household. Her childhood, while privileged beyond measure, had been marked by the constant awareness that her future would be determined not by her own desires, but by the political needs of the empire. The marble corridors of the palace, with their statues of deified ancestors and frescoes depicting imperial victories, served as daily reminders of the burden of her bloodline. Every lesson in deportment, every instruction in the domestic arts, every moment of her education had been designed to prepare her for this inevitable sacrifice to the machinery of imperial succession. The young man who would become her husband, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, later known to history as Nero, was himself a product of the complex political marriages that characterized the Julio-Claudian dynasty. At 15, he possessed the confidence of one who had been groomed for power from birth. Yet his youth meant that he, too, was largely inexperienced in the intimate realities of marriage. His education had focused on rhetoric, philosophy, and the arts of governance, with little attention paid to the emotional complexities of matrimony. The marriage represented for him an important step toward securing his position in the imperial succession. It's a political necessity that would bring him closer to the throne that his ambitious mother, Agrippina, had long coveted for him. The betrothal negotiations that preceded their marriage revealed the calculating nature of Roman imperial politics. Agrippina, who had become Claudius's fourth wife through her own strategic marriage, saw in this union the perfect opportunity to secure her son's claim to imperial power. The proposal was presented as a natural alliance between two branches of the imperial family, a way to strengthen the dynasty and ensure its continuity. Yet, beneath these diplomatic courtesies lay a web of ambition, manipulation, and barely concealed threats that would ultimately consume both families. For Claudia, the announcement of her betrothal marked the end of whatever childhood remained. To her, the girl who had perhaps harbored dreams of choice in her matrimonial future now faced the reality of her predetermined fate. The months of preparation that followed were filled with instruction in the duties of an imperial wife, lessons that went far beyond the domestic skills expected of ordinary Roman matrons. She would be expected to serve not only as a wife, but as a symbol of imperial legitimacy, a living link between her father's reign and her husband's future rule. The wedding preparations took place against the backdrop of growing tensions within the imperial household. Claudius, now aging and increasingly frail, had begun to show signs of favoritism toward his biological son Britannicus, much to Agrippina's alarm. The marriage between Claudia and Nero became not just a union of two young people, but a strategic move in the deadly game of imperial succession. Every detail of the ceremony was scrutinized for its political implications. Every gesture analyzed for signs of the emperor's true intentions regarding his heir. The wedding itself was a spectacle that surpassed even the grandest aristocratic ceremonies. The imperial palace was transformed into a stage set worthy of the gods themselves, with decorations that spoke of unlimited wealth and power. Golden vessels replaced the silver ones used in ordinary, wealthy households, while the clothing and jewelry of the guests represented the finest work of craftsmen from across the empire. The bride's wedding dress, woven from silk imported from the distant lands of the East, carried embroidered patterns that told the story of her family's rise to power. Yet, for all its magnificence, the ceremony could not disguise the essential tragedy of the union. Claudia, moving through the rituals with the grace expected of imperial blood, appeared to observers as a beautiful but fragile figure, her youth emphasized by the elaborate adult ceremonies she was required to perform. The weight of the imperial crown, temporarily placed upon her head during certain portions of the ceremony, seemed almost too heavy for her slender neck to bear. Her responses to the ritual questions were spoken in a voice so soft that even the officiating priests had to strain to hear her words. Nero, by contrast, played his role with the theatrical flair that would later characterize his reign. His responses rang out clearly in the ceremonial hall. His gestures were performed with studied elegance, and his interaction with the wedding guests demonstrated the political skills that had been carefully cultivated throughout his education. Yet, those who knew him well might have noticed signs of the instability that would later manifest in more destructive ways. The slight tremor in his hands during moments of stillness, the way his eyes seemed to search the crowd for approval, the forced quality of his laughter during the lighter moments of the celebration. The wedding feast that followed the ceremony provided a stage for the complex social dynamics that governed imperial court life. The seating arrangements alone told a story of political alliances and rivalries, with each guest's position at the table reflecting their current standing in the imperial hierarchy. The food, prepared by the finest cooks in the empire, was presented in courses that demonstrated not just wealth, but also the reach of Roman power. Exotic spices from Africa, wines from the furthest provinces, delicacies that required the coordination of trade routes spanning continents. Claudia, seated at the place of honor beside her new husband, found herself the center of attention from hundreds of eyes, each guest studying her demeanor for signs of how this marriage might affect their own fortunes. The conversations that swirled around her ranged from compliments on her beauty to subtle political inquiries about her father's health and intentions. She was required to respond to each comment with appropriate grace, while simultaneously preparing mentally for the ordeal that awaited her. When the festivities finally ended, the entertainment provided during the feast reflected the imperial family's taste for spectacle and luxury. Its professional dancers performed choreographed pieces that told stories of mythological marriages. Their movements, designed to be both beautiful and educational, reminding the guests of the divine precedents for human unions. Musicians played compositions written specifically for the occasion, their melodies weaving through the conversations and creating an atmosphere of celebration that masked the underlying tensions of the gathering. As the evening progressed, the bride's anxiety became increasingly difficult to conceal. The wine that was pressed upon her throughout the meal provided little relief from her growing apprehension, and the rich foods seemed to turn to ash in her mouth. The laughter and conversations of the guests created a cacophony that seemed to come from another world, a world of adults engaged in adult concerns that she was expected to join, but could not fully comprehend. The weight of her wedding jewelry, beautiful though it was, seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour, as if the gold and precious stones were absorbing her fears and amplifying them back to her. The moment of departure from the feast, when the bride and groom would be escorted to their marriage chamber, approached with the inevitability of a natural disaster. The servants who had attended Claudia throughout the day began to make subtle preparations for this transition, their movements careful and practiced as they prepared to guide their young mistress through the final phase of her wedding day. The guests, sensing the approach of this climactic moment, began to offer their final congratulations and advice, their words carrying the weight of generations of Roman matrimonial wisdom. The procession to the marriage chamber, though it took place entirely within the confines of the imperial palace, maintained all the traditional elements of the ritual journey from father's house to husband's home. Torches were lit to guide the way through the marble corridors, their flames casting dancing shadows on the walls decorated with scenes of imperial triumph. The bride's attendants, chosen from among the most trusted female servants of the household, formed a protective circle around her as she walked. Their presence providing a final buffer against the masculine world she was about to enter. The marriage chamber itself had been prepared with all the luxury befitting an imperial union. It's a bed constructed from the finest woods and decorated with gold and ivory inlays, draped with silks dyed in the imperial purple. The room's decorations included frescoes depicting the marriages of gods and heroes, their divine unions serving as both inspiration and intimidation for the mortal couple who would soon occupy this space. The scent of burning incense, mixed with the perfumes of scattered flower petals, created an atmosphere that was both sacred and sensual, designed to facilitate the transformation of two young strangers into a married couple. The moment of solitude that preceded Nero's arrival in the marriage chamber provided Claudia with her final opportunity for private reflection before her life changed irrevocably. Imagine yourself in that opulent room, where the weight of imperial history pressed down upon every surface, where the very air seemed thick with the expectations of generations of Caesars, who had built their power upon strategic marriages just like this one. The young bride, barely 13 years old, sat upon the edge of the marriage bed with a composure that had been drilled into her since childhood. Yet her hands trembled slightly as they smoothed the folds of her sleeping tunic, a gesture that revealed the child still hidden beneath the imperial facade. The sounds that filtered through the thick walls of the palace told their own story of the continuing celebration. Distant laughter and music provided a surreal soundtrack to her private ordeal, while the occasional footstep in the corridor outside made her start with nervous anticipation. Each sound seemed amplified in the silence of her waiting, creating a heightened awareness that made every sensation the softness of silk against her skin, the flickering of lamplight on golden surfaces, the subtle perfume of rose petals take on an almost unbearable intensity. Claudia's education had included the basic facts of marriage and motherhood that every Roman girl of her class received, yet the clinical descriptions provided by her tutors had done little to prepare her for the emotional complexity of this moment. She understood her duty to produce heirs for the imperial line. She knew the importance of submitting to her husband's authority, and she had been instructed in the deportment expected of a married woman. But no amount of instruction could have prepared her for the profound loneliness of facing this transformation alone, surrounded by luxury, yet isolated from any source of genuine comfort or support. The approach of footsteps in the corridor, measured, deliberate, unmistakably masculine, announced the end of her solitary vigil. The heavy wooden door, carved with scenes of marital bliss from classical mythology, opened to reveal her husband, no longer the boy she had occasionally encountered during formal court functions, but a young man invested with the full authority of Roman matrimonial law. Nero entered the chamber with the studied grace that characterized all his public appearances. Yet, even his theatrical training could not entirely conceal the awkwardness of his youth or the magnitude of the moment they were about to share. Bridegroom's appearance spoke of careful preparation designed to emphasize both his masculine authority and his imperial status. His hair, styled in the fashion favored by young aristocrats, had been arranged to frame his face in a way that emphasized his best features while concealing the signs of youth that might diminish his commanding presence. His tunic, made from the finest linen and embroidered with gold thread, marked him as a member of the imperial family, while its simple cut suggested the domestic intimacy of the marriage chamber. The scent of expensive oils and perfumes that accompanied him into the room created an olfactory signature of luxury and power that would forever be associated in Claudia's memory with this night of transformation. The initial moments of their encounter were governed by the formal protocols that had been carefully rehearsed during their betrothal period. Nero approached his bride with the measured steps of one performing a ritual dance, while Claudia rose from her seated position with the graceful movement that had been perfected through years of deportment training. Their exchange of greetings, spoken in voices carefully modulated to convey appropriate emotion, without betraying excessive familiarity, maintained the dignity expected of imperial persons, even in the privacy of the marriage chamber. The sharing of wine that preceded their physical union served multiple symbolic and practical purposes within the Roman matrimonial tradition. The cup itself, crafted from gold and decorated with scenes of divine marriages, represented the union of their two bloodlines and the creation of a new family unit within the imperial hierarchy. The wine, aged in the imperial cellars and flavored with honey and spices, was intended to ease the transition from the formal ceremonies of the day to the intimate realities of the night. Yet, for Claudia, the rich liquid seemed to stick in her throat, its sweetness cloying rather than comforting as she contemplated what was to come. Nero's approach to the consummation of their marriage reflected both his youth and his training in the assertion of masculine authority. His movements, while gentle by the standards of Roman matrimonial expectation, carried the confidence of one who had been assured of his rights and prerogatives as a husband. The removal of Claudia's sleeping tunic was performed with ritualistic solemnity, gesture designed to emphasize the symbolic importance of this moment while maintaining the dignity appropriate to their imperial status. The fabric, as it fell away from her young body, seemed to carry with it the last vestiges of her childhood, leaving her exposed not just physically but emotionally to the realities of adult life. The physical consummation of their marriage unfolded with the inevitable progression of a natural phenomenon. Yet, its impact upon both participants was far more complex than the simple biological act it represented. For Claudia, the experience involved not just the loss of her virginity, but the fundamental transformation of her identity from protected daughter to married woman, from imperial princess to imperial wife, from child to potential mother of future emperors. The pain that accompanied this transition was both physical and psychological, a sharp reminder that her body now belonged to her husband and to the state that their union was meant to serve. Nero's experience of their wedding night was colored by his own youth and inexperience. Despite the confidence he projected through his formal training and preparation, the responsibility of performing successfully in this most intimate of imperial duties weighed heavily upon him, particularly given the political implications of their union. The need to demonstrate his virility and capability as a husband was complicated by his genuine youth and the artificial nature of their relationship, creating a performance anxiety that no amount of masculine bravado could entirely mask. The completion of their physical union was marked by the traditional examination of the bed sheets that would provide proof of Claudia's virginity and the successful consummation of their marriage. This invasive ritual, performed by trusted female servants of the imperial household, transformed the most private moment of their lives into a matter of public record. The sight of blood upon the white linen would be reported to the emperor himself, confirming that his daughter had successfully fulfilled her duty and that the marriage could be considered legitimate in both legal and social terms. The immediate aftermath of their wedding night found both bride and groom struggling to adjust to the profound changes in their relationship and status. Claudia, now technically a woman in the eyes of Roman law and society, faced the challenge of reconciling her continued youth and inexperience with the adult responsibilities that had suddenly been thrust upon her. The physical discomfort that lingered from her defloration served as a constant reminder of her new status, while the emotional complexities of her situation created a psychological burden that no amount of imperial luxury could alleviate. The transformation in their daily routines reflected the fundamental change that their marriage had brought to both their lives. Where once they had encountered each other only during formal court functions, they were now expected to share not just a bed, but a household, creating an intimacy that neither their upbringings nor their personalities had prepared them to navigate successfully. The pressure to present a united front to the imperial court while privately adjusting to their new relationship created additional stress that complicated their already difficult situation. The political implications of their successful consummation began to manifest themselves almost immediately as various court factions adjusted their strategies to account for the new reality of Nero's strengthened position within the imperial hierarchy. Agrippina's satisfaction at her son's successful performance was tempered by her recognition that Claudia's potential fertility represented both an opportunity and a threat. Future children would strengthen Nero's claim to the throne, but they would also create alternative centers of power that might eventually challenge her own influence over her son. The Emperor Claudius's reaction to the confirmation of his daughter's declaration revealed the complex emotions that characterized his relationship with his family. His satisfaction at the successful completion of the marriage was mixed with a father's natural concern for his daughter's well-being, creating an internal conflict between his parental instincts and his imperial obligations. The reports he received from the household servants about Claudia's apparent distress were balanced against the political necessity of maintaining the marriage alliance that would secure the imperial succession. The young couple's adjustment to married life was further complicated by the public nature of their relationship and the constant scrutiny of the imperial court. Every interaction between them was analyzed for signs of affection or discord, every gesture interpreted as a reflection of their marriage's success or failure. The pressure to perform happiness and harmony while privately struggling with the realities of their situation created an additional layer of stress that made their already difficult adjustment even more challenging. The seeds of future tragedy were already visible in the dynamics that emerged during their early married life. Nero's growing confidence in his imperial destiny, encouraged by his mother's ambitions and his own theatrical inclinations, began to clash with Claudia's more traditional understanding of marriage and duty. Her expectation of a conventional matrimonial relationship, based on mutual respect and gradual affection, proved incompatible with Nero's increasingly grandiose vision of his role as a future emperor and his growing interest in the more glamorous aspects of Roman cultural life. The household servants who attended the young couple during their early married life observed subtle signs of the dysfunction that would eventually destroy their relationship. Claudia's withdrawn behavior and Nero's increasing absences from their shared quarters suggested that the physical consummation of their marriage had not led to the emotional bonding that typically characterized successful Roman unions. The formal courtesy that governed their public interactions masked a growing distance that threatened to undermine the very political alliance. Their marriage was meant to cement the broader implications of their wedding. Night extended far beyond their personal relationship to influence the entire trajectory of the imperial succession. The successful consummation that had been celebrated as a political triumph would ultimately contribute to the tragedy that befell both families, as the marriage that had been designed to strengthen the imperial dynasty instead became a source of conflict and eventual destruction. The night that had seemed to secure Nero's position as heir would ultimately lead to consequences that neither the young couple nor their families could have anticipated during those first hopeful hours of their union. The months that followed Claudia and Nero's wedding night revealed the complex web of consequences that could emerge from even the most carefully orchestrated Roman marriage. Imagine yourself observing the imperial household during this period, where the marble corridors that had once echoed with celebration now carried whispered conversations about the young couple's apparent inability to find happiness in their union. The servants who attended them daily became unwilling witnesses to a marriage that was slowly transforming from political triumph to personal tragedy. Their discreet observations forming a record of dysfunction that would ultimately reach the highest levels of imperial power. Claudia's transformation from bride to wife had been accomplished in the technical sense. Yet, the emotional and psychological adjustments required for a successful marriage proved far more elusive. The young woman who emerged from her wedding night bore the physical marks of her declaration and the legal status of a married matron. But her essential character remained that of a sheltered child, thrust into circumstances beyond her comprehension or control. The weight of her new responsibilities serving as a suitable companion to a future emperor, managing an imperial household, and eventually producing heirs to continue the dynasty seemed to press down upon her slender shoulders like an invisible burden that grew heavier with each passing day. The imperial physicians who attended Claudia during the weeks following her marriage noted subtle signs of the psychological distress that often accompanied difficult marital adjustments. Her appetite diminished despite the elaborate meals prepared by the palace kitchens, leading to a gradual loss of weight that emphasized her youth and fragility. Her sleep became fitful and interrupted, marked by dreams that left her trembling and disoriented upon awakening. The headaches that plagued her with increasing frequency required the administration of herbal remedies that provided only temporary relief from symptoms that seemed to have no physical cause. Nero's own adjustment to married life revealed the fundamental incompatibility between his artistic temperament and the domestic expectations of Roman matrimony. The young man who had been trained in rhetoric and philosophy found himself increasingly restless within the confines of conventional marital responsibility. His interests, which had always tended toward the theatrical and grandiose, began to diverge more sharply from the quiet domesticity that his wife represented. The hours he was expected to spend in Claudia's company felt like imprisonment to someone whose imagination was fired by dreams of public performance and imperial grandeur. The growing distance between the couple became apparent to even casual observers within the imperial court. Their public appearances, once characterized by the tentative affection appropriate to newlyweds, gradually took on the quality of formal performances where each gesture seemed carefully calculated rather than spontaneous. The conversations they shared during court functions became increasingly stilted and conventional, lacking the warmth and intimacy that observers expected to develop between husband and wife. Their physical positioning during ceremonies and social gatherings reflected their emotional distance, as they maintained the minimum proximity required by protocol while avoiding the closer contact that would suggest genuine affection. The political ramifications of their failing marriage began to manifest themselves as various court factions adjusted their strategies to account for the changing dynamics within the imperial family. Agrippina, whose ambitions for her son had been largely fulfilled through his marriage to Claudia, found herself facing unexpected complications as Nero's dissatisfaction with his wife threatened to undermine the very alliance she had worked so hard to create. The whispered reports of household servants about the couple's separate sleeping arrangements and their increasingly formal interactions raised questions about the stability of the marriage that had been intended to secure Nero's imperial future. Emperor Claudius, observing his daughter's obvious unhappiness and his son-in-law's growing indifference, faced a dilemma that revealed the fundamental tensions between paternal affection and imperial responsibility. His natural inclination to protect Claudia from further suffering conflicted with his obligation to maintain the political stability that their marriage represented. The reports he received from trusted advisors about the couple's dysfunction forced him to confront the possibility that his carefully planned dynastic strategy might be failing. Despite its promising beginning, the absence of pregnancy during the early months of their marriage became a source of increasing concern for all parties involved. While the failure to conceive immediately was not unusual for such young couples, the knowledge that their physical relations had become infrequent raised questions about the likelihood of future heirs. The imperial physicians who examined Claudia reported no physical impediments to conception, leading to speculation that the couple's emotional distance was preventing the regular intimacy necessary for reproduction. This medical concern took on political significance as various court factions began to consider the implications of a potentially barren imperial marriage. Claudia's relationship with her mother-in-law, Agrippina, evolved from initial cordiality to barely concealed tension as the older woman's frustration with the marriage's problems began to manifest itself. Agrippina's ambitious nature made it impossible for her to accept that her son's marital difficulties might threaten his imperial prospects, leading her to place increasing pressure on Claudia to fulfill her duties as a wife more effectively. The young bride found herself caught between her husband's growing indifference and her mother-in-law's escalating demands, creating a domestic situation that would have challenged even a more mature and experienced woman. The isolation that characterized Claudia's daily existence became more pronounced as her marriage's problems became common knowledge within the imperial household. As the female companions who had once sought her friendship now maintained a careful distance, uncertain whether association with an apparently failing imperial wife might damage their own standing at court. The activities that had once provided her with pleasure, reading, music, the domestic arts, lost their appeal as reminders of the conventional feminine life she had been expected to embrace but could not seem to master successfully. Nero's increasing absences from the marital home reflected his growing investment in pursuits that took him away from the domestic sphere, where his wife represented both duty and disappointment. His interest in music, poetry, theatrical performance provided him with alternative sources of satisfaction and approval that contrasted sharply with the tension and obligation that characterized his home life. The young men who became his companions in these artistic endeavors offered him the admiration and intellectual stimulation that his marriage had failed to provide, creating a parallel social world that excluded his wife entirely. The transformation of their physical relationship, from the tentative intimacy of their wedding night to virtual celibacy, reflected the broader deterioration of their emotional connection. The chamber that had once witnessed their consummation became a space of avoidance and discomfort, where both partners sought to minimize the time spent in each other's company. The servants who maintained their living quarters reported evidence of increasingly separate lives, different sleeping schedules, separate meal times, a gradual accumulation of personal possessions that reflected their diverging interests and social circles. The court gossip that surrounded their marriage evolved from sympathetic concern for young newlyweds adjusting to their new status to more critical observations about their apparent incompatibility. The whispered conversations that took place in palace corridors and private dining rooms began to include speculation about the possibility of divorce or annulment. Despite the political complications such actions would create, the freedmen and senators who depended upon imperial favor for their own advancement found themselves forced to navigate carefully between their relationships with different family members, uncertain which alliances would prove most advantageous. In the long term, the religious dimensions of their marriage's failure began to attract attention from those who interpreted human affairs through the lens of divine approval or disapproval. The priests who served the imperial household noted the absence of the traditional offerings of thanksgiving that typically followed successful marriages, while the augurs who read omens for the imperial family reported signs that suggested divine dissatisfaction with the union. These religious concerns added another layer of complexity to an already difficult situation. Its failure to maintain the gods' favor could have implications that extended far beyond the personal happiness of the young couple. The educational aspects of Claudia's continuing development as an imperial wife took on an increasingly desperate quality as her tutors attempted to address the deficiencies that seemed to be contributing to her marital difficulties. Additional instruction in household management, social graces, and the subtle arts of feminine influence was provided in the hope that improved skills might lead to improved relations with her husband. Yet these efforts proved largely futile, as the fundamental problem lay not in Claudia's capabilities, but in the incompatibility between her character and circumstances and those of her increasingly ambitious and self-absorbed husband. The financial implications of their failing marriage began to manifest themselves in ways that reflected the broader political and economic networks that imperial unions were meant to create and maintain. The dowry arrangements that had been negotiated as part of their marriage settlement became sources of tension as questions arose about the obligations that might survive the dissolution of the union. The business partnerships and trade agreements that had been established on the assumption of a stable imperial marriage faced uncertainty as a word of the couple's problems spread throughout the commercial networks of the empire. The military dimensions of their marriage's political significance also came under scrutiny as commanders and provincial governors reassessed their loyalty calculations in light of the changing dynamics within the imperial family. The legions that had celebrated Nero's marriage as confirmation of imperial stability now faced uncertainty about the succession plans that their allegiance was meant to support. The careful balance of power that had been established through decades of strategic marriages and political alliances began to shift as various military leaders positioned themselves for the uncertainties that lay ahead. The cultural impact of their marriage's failure extended beyond the immediate political sphere to influence broader Roman attitudes toward imperial authority and the institution of marriage itself. The poets and historians who chronicled imperial affairs found themselves facing the delicate task of recording events that reflected poorly on the imperial family while maintaining the respect and discretion expected of those who depended upon imperial patronage. The public festivals and celebrations that had marked their wedding began to take on an ironic quality as the contrast between the initial optimism and the subsequent reality became increasingly apparent to all observers. The archaeological record of Roman domestic life speaks to us across the centuries with a voice that is both intimate and mysterious, revealing secrets that the ancient writers never dared to record. Imagine yourself standing in the cool shadows of a modern museum where the artifacts of Roman marriage rest in climate-controlled cases, their surfaces bearing the fingerprints of women who lived and loved and feared nearly 2,000 years ago. These silent witnesses to ancient anxieties tell stories that complement and complicate the official narratives of Roman matrimonial bliss, offering glimpses into the private emotional landscape of women whose public roles demanded perfect compliance with social expectations. In the excavated ruins of Pompeii, where volcanic ash preserved the most intimate details of daily life, archaeologists have uncovered evidence that speaks directly to the fears and hopes that surrounded Roman wedding nights. The Villa of the Feti, with its famous fresco depicting the marriage of mythological figures, contained within its private chambers a collection of small terracotta tablets that had been carefully hidden beneath loose floorboards. When these tablets were finally deciphered, they revealed themselves to be personal prayers and supplications, written in the uncertain hand of young women and addressed to the goddesses who were believed to protect brides during their most vulnerable moments. These prayer tablets, known to scholars as Depictions Nuptiales, provide an unfiltered window into the anxieties that plagued Roman brides as they approached their wedding nights. The language is simple and direct, lacking the elaborate rhetoric that characterized public religious ceremonies. Yet, the emotional intensity of these private appeals transcends the barriers of time and culture. One tablet, discovered in the bedroom of what appears to have been a young bride, bears the inscription, "Venus, Mother of Love, grant that his hands be gentle, and that I may find favor in his eyes. Let the pain be brief and the shame bearable, that I may fulfill my duty with honor." The very existence of such a prayer suggests a level of fear and uncertainty that the official celebration of Roman marriage was designed to conceal. The physical objects associated with Roman wedding nights tell their own stories of preparation, anxiety, and transformation. In the archaeological collection of the British Museum rests a silver mirror found in the tomb of a young woman who died shortly after her marriage, its surface still bearing traces of the antimony that had been used to darken her eyes on her wedding day. The handle of this mirror is decorated with scenes of bridal preparation, showing young women being attended by servants while goddesses hover nearby, offering protection and blessing. Yet the mirror's surface, when examined under modern scientific techniques, reveals scratches and marks that suggest it was gripped with unusual force. perhaps by trembling hands during those final moments of preparation before entering the marriage chamber. The jewelry discovered in Roman burial sites provides another layer of evidence about the complex emotions surrounding marriage and sexuality in the ancient world. A gold ring found in a grave near Trier bears an inscription that initially appears to celebrate matrimonial happiness. May our union be blessed with many sons. However, closer examination of the ring reveals a hidden compartment containing a small scroll of papyrus upon which is written a very different sentiment. Mother of gods, protect me from pain and preserve my life through this trial. The contrast between the public message of the ring's surface and the private plea concealed within suggests the complex duality that characterized many Roman marriages. Where public celebration masked private apprehension, the cosmetic implements found in Roman archaeological contexts speak to the elaborate preparations that preceded wedding nights, while also revealing the anxiety that surrounded these transformative moments. A set of ivory cosmetic applicators discovered in a villa outside Rome bears tiny scratches and nicks that suggest nervous handling. The containers for rouge and kohl found alongside these implements show evidence of having been used heavily on a single occasion, perhaps during the extensive preparations that preceded a wedding night. The presence of small votive offerings buried beneath the cosmetic table suggests that even the application of makeup was accompanied by prayers for divine protection and favor. The beds themselves, or rather their remains, provide some of the most poignant evidence of Roman wedding night experiences. The bronze fittings from a marriage bed, discovered in a wealthy Roman household in Lyon, include decorative elements that were designed to create a sense of luxury and comfort. Yet, these same fittings show evidence of repair and modification. That suggests the bed was used for purposes beyond its original intention. Small holes drilled into the bronze framework appear to have been used to attach additional restraints or supports. Scratches in the metal surface suggest considerable wear and stress. The implications of these modifications are troubling, as they hint at physical experiences that may have been far from the gentle, romantic encounters depicted in Roman poetry and art. The discovery of medical implements in contexts associated with Roman marriages provides another window into the realities of wedding night experiences. A set of bronze surgical instruments found in the ruins of a Roman house in Chester includes devices that appear to have been designed for gynecological procedures. The presence of these instruments in a domestic rather than medical context suggests that they may have been used to address complications arising from difficult defloration experiences. The wear patterns on these instruments indicate regular use, while their careful storage in lined wooden boxes suggests, we are valued and maintained with considerable care. The textiles that have survived from Roman domestic contexts, though rare and fragmentary, also contribute to our understanding of wedding night preparations and experiences. A piece of silk discovered in an Egyptian burial ground shows evidence of having been deliberately stained with what appears to be blood, then carefully preserved between layers of other fabrics. Chemical analysis of this stain suggests it came from a young woman who had recently lost her virginity, while the elaborate embroidery that surrounds the stained area indicates that this textile was considered significant enough to merit careful preservation. The silk itself was imported from distant China, suggesting that this artifact belonged to a family of considerable wealth and status. The cursed tablets discovered in Roman archaeological sites provide, perhaps, the most direct evidence of the fears and resentments that could surround Roman marriages. One tablet, found buried beneath the threshold of a house in Roman London, bears a curse directed against a bridegroom. May his member fail him on his wedding night. May he bring shame upon his family, and may his bride know that the gods do not favor this union. The tablet is written in the hand of someone who is clearly literate and educated, suggesting that even members of the upper classes sometimes harbored deep resentments about arranged marriages and their consequences. The religious votive offerings found in temples dedicated to female deities provide additional insight into the spiritual dimensions of Roman wedding night anxieties. A collection of small clay figurines discovered in a temple of Diana near Rome includes several that appear to represent young women in poses of supplication or distress. These figurines, offered by brides seeking divine protection, bear inscribed prayers that ask for courage, for gentle husbands, and for survival through the ordeal of defloration. The sheer number of these offerings, hundreds, have been discovered in this single temple, suggests that wedding night fears were common, enough to support a thriving trade in protective votives. The preservation of organic materials in waterlogged Roman sites has provided archaeologists with access to materials that would normally have decomposed long ago. In a Roman settlement excavated near London, researchers discovered a wooden tablet that had been deliberately thrown into a well. When the wax surface was carefully cleaned and examined, it revealed a letter from a young bride to her sister, written on the morning after her wedding night. The letter, composed in simple Latin, describes her experience in terms that are both matter-of-fact and deeply moving. It is finished, sister. I am now as mother was and grandmother before her. The pain was great, but brief, and I believe I have pleased my husband as a wife should. Yet I find myself changed in ways I did not expect, and I wonder if the woman who writes this letter is the same child who played with you in Father's garden only yesterday. The analysis of food remains from Roman archaeological contexts has revealed interesting patterns related to wedding preparations and celebrations. Excavations of kitchen areas in wealthy Roman homes have uncovered evidence of special meals prepared for wedding nights, including exotic spices and imported delicacies that were believed to enhance fertility and sexual performance. However, these same excavations have also revealed evidence of herbal preparations that appear to have been designed to reduce pain and anxiety, including significant quantities of opium, poppy seeds, and other substances with analgesic properties. The presence of these materials suggests that the preparation of brides for their wedding nights may have included pharmaceutical assistance to help them endure their ordeal. The graffiti discovered on the walls of Roman buildings provides another source of evidence about attitudes toward marriage and sexuality. In the ruins of a Roman boarding house in Ostia, archaeologists found scratched into a wall the message, "Bride, beware the promises of men, for they speak sweetly before the wedding and roughly after." This message, written in a hand that suggests some education, was apparently placed where it would be seen by young women staying in the establishment, perhaps those who were in Rome for their own weddings. The location and content of this graffiti suggests that informal networks of women existed to share warnings and advice about the realities of marriage. The discovery of contraceptive materials in Roman archaeological contexts provides evidence that some brides were concerned not just with surviving their wedding nights, but with controlling their subsequent fertility. A set of bronze implements discovered in a Roman villa in Turkey includes devices that appear to have been designed for intrauterine insertion, while associated organic remains suggest the use of various plant-based contraceptive preparations. The presence of these materials in wealthy domestic contexts suggests that even upper-class women sought to exercise some control over their reproductive lives, despite the social and legal pressures to produce heirs as quickly as possible. The religious and cultural dimensions of Roman wedding night practices revealed themselves through archaeological evidence that speaks to the deep spiritual anxieties surrounding these transformative moments. Imagine yourself examining the delicate bronze amulets discovered in the tomb of a young Roman bride near Equincum. Their surfaces worn smooth by nervous fingers that once clutched them during the long hours of wedding night preparation. These small objects, no larger than a modern coin, bear intricate engravings of protective deities and magical symbols that were believed to safeguard young women during their most vulnerable moments. The very existence of such amulets suggests that Roman brides approached their wedding nights with a level of spiritual preparation that matched their physical and emotional preparations. The cult of Juno Lucina, the goddess who presided over childbirth and women's reproductive health, maintained temples throughout the Roman world where brides could seek protection and blessing before their marriages. Archaeological excavations at the temple of Juno Lucina in Rome have revealed thousands of small clay figurines, each representing a bride making supplication for divine protection. These votives, dating from the early Republic through the late Empire, show remarkable consistency in their iconography. Young women with downcast eyes, their hands positioned in gestures of pleading or protection over their abdomens. The accumulation of these offerings over centuries suggests that wedding night fears were not merely personal anxieties, but cultural constants that required religious mediation. Recent excavations in the ancient city of Emerita Augusta in modern-day Spain have uncovered evidence of a unique regional variation in Roman wedding customs that reveals the cultural diversity within the empire's approach to marriage. Key, in several houses dating to the 2nd century CE, archaeologists discovered small chambers adjacent to the main marriage bedrooms that appeared to have served as preparatory spaces for brides. These rooms, which measure approximately 6 feet square, contain evidence of ritual bathing facilities, storage niches for ceremonial objects, and most intriguingly, what appears to be a small altar dedicated to a local Iberian goddess who had been syncretized with the Roman Diana. The altar itself bears inscriptions in both Latin and the local Lusitanian language, suggesting that Roman wedding customs in this region had been adapted to incorporate pre-existing religious traditions. The Latin portion of the inscription reads conventionally, "To Diana, protector of virgins, we offer these gifts in hope of favor." However, the Lusitanian text, when translated, reveals a more specific and desperate plea. "Forest mother, guard your daughter in the darkness. Let the hunter be swift and the wound heal clean." This bilingual appeal suggests that local populations maintained their own understanding of marriage and sexuality, even while adopting Roman legal and social structures. The analysis of organic remains from these Spanish sites has revealed evidence of herbal preparations that appeared to have been used to ease the transition from virginity to married status. Seeds and plant material found in storage vessels within the bridal preparation chambers include significant quantities of valerian, poppy, and willow bark, all substances known for their pain-relieving and sedative properties. The presence of these materials in such specific contexts suggests that Roman communities had developed sophisticated pharmacological approaches to managing the physical and emotional challenges of wedding nights. Archaeological evidence from Roman Britain reveals another fascinating variation in wedding night customs. It's one that appears to blend Roman practices with Celtic traditions in ways that created unique hybrid rituals. Excavations at a Romano-British villa near Cirencester uncovered a marriage chamber that had been decorated with both Roman frescoes depicting mythological wedding scenes and Celtic symbols carved into the wooden ceiling beams. The floor of this chamber contained a series of small pits that had been filled with various organic materials and then sealed with clay. Practice that appears to combine Roman domestic religion with Celtic earth burial traditions. The contents of these floor deposits, preserved by the anaerobic conditions created by the clay ceiling, provide a unique window into the spiritual preparation that accompanied Romano-British weddings. Analysis revealed hair clippings from both bride and groom, fragments of their childhood clothing, and small personal objects that appear to have been deliberately buried as part of a ritual designed to mark the end of their unmarried lives. Most poignantly, several of the deposits contain small scrolls of birch bark bearing messages written in a mixture of Latin and Brittonic script, prayers, and promises that speak to the emotional complexity of these transitional moments. 1. Such scroll, carefully unrolled and translated by specialists in ancient British languages, contains what appears to be a bride's private vow. "I bury here the girl who ran free through meadows and feared no touch but her mother's. I ask the old gods and the new to bless the woman who rises from this earth, that she may find strength in submission and joy in duty. The juxtaposition of Roman concepts of wifely duty with Celtic imagery of earth burial and rebirth suggests that provincial populations created their own synthesis of cultural traditions around the universal experience of marriage. The archaeological record from Roman Egypt provides perhaps the most detailed evidence of the medical and pharmaceutical aspects of wedding night preparation. Preserved by the unique climatic conditions of the region, papyrus documents discovered in the ruins of Oxyrhynchus include what appears to be a physician's manual, specifically devoted to treating the complications that could arise from difficult defloration experiences. This manual, dating to the 3rd century CE, provides clinical descriptions of various injuries that might occur during a bride's first sexual experience, along with detailed treatment protocols involving herbal preparations, surgical interventions, and extended bed rest. The medical papyrus also reveals the existence of a specialized class of female physicians who were specifically trained to attend young brides during their first nights of marriage. These women, known as Etrinae, Parthenae, virgin healers, appear to have been summoned to aristocratic households when wedding night difficulties arose. The document describes their techniques for treating traumatic injuries, managing excessive bleeding, and providing emotional support to traumatized young women. The very existence of such specialists suggests that wedding night complications were common enough to require professional medical intervention. Archaeological evidence from the Roman settlement at Chester has revealed the existence of what appears to have been a commercial workshop specializing in the production of wedding night accessories and preparations. The site, located near the civilian settlement outside the legionary fortress, contains evidence of workshops that produced various items specifically marketed to families preparing for marriages. These included specialized cosmetics designed to enhance a bride's appearance while also providing numbing effects for sensitive skin, perfumed oils that were believed to encourage gentleness in husbands, and small bronze implements whose exact purpose remains unclear but which appear to have been related to intimate preparation. The workshop's inventory, preserved in a layer of ash from a fire that destroyed the building in the late 2nd century, included finished products that revealed the anxiety and preparation that surrounded Roman weddings. Among the items recovered were small glass vials containing a preparation that chemical analysis has identified as a mixture of opium extract and aromatic oils, tiny bronze figurines depicting protective deities that could be concealed in bridal clothing, and what appears to be an early form of contraceptive device made from animal membrane and bronze wire. The discovery of similar workshops in other Roman cities suggests that the commercialization of wedding anxiety was a significant aspect of the ancient economy. The standardization of certain products across different sites indicates that there was sufficient demand to support specialized manufacturing and trade networks devoted to serving the needs of nervous brides and concerned families. The profit margins suggested by the quality of materials and craftsmanship found in these workshops indicate that wedding preparation was a lucrative business that attracted skilled artisans and sophisticated entrepreneurs. Recent underwater archaeology in the harbor of ancient Alexandria has uncovered evidence of international trade in wedding-related goods, suggesting that the anxieties surrounding Roman marriage were addressed through an empire-wide network of specialized commerce. Amphorae recovered from a merchant ship that sank in the 3rd century CE contained residues of various substances that appeared to have been marketed specifically to families preparing for weddings. These included exotic perfumes from India that were believed to ensure marital harmony, rare minerals from Africa that were ground into powders for cosmetic use, and preserved botanical specimens from various corners of the empire that were valued for their supposed aphrodisiac or analgesic properties. The ship's manifest, partially preserved on papyrus, reveals the economic scale of this trade in wedding commodities. The cargo included items specifically destined for the households of wealthy Roman families, with price lists that suggest these specialized products commanded premium prices. The manifest also indicates that certain items were restricted for use only by families of senatorial rank, suggesting that access to the most effective wedding night preparations was limited by social class and economic resources. Archaeological analysis of Roman cemeteries has provided evidence of the long-term health consequences that could result from traumatic wedding night experiences. Skeletal remains of young women who died shortly after marriage show evidence of pelvic injuries consistent with violent sexual encounters. The positioning of burial goods suggests that these women were recognized as having died as a result of their marital duties. The elaborate grave goods found in some of these burials, including expensive jewelry and imported luxury items, suggest that families sought to honor daughters who had died in the service of matrimonial obligation. Epitaphs carved on these tombs provide poignant testimony to the recognition that wedding night trauma could be fatal. One inscription from a tomb near Trier reads, "Here lies Claudia Maxima, aged 14 years, who died in the fulfillment of her duty as a wife. Her sacrifice honored her family and secured her place among the blessed." Another, from a cemetery outside Rome, states simply, "She was brave when bravery was required." These brief memorials suggest that Roman society was aware of the risks involved in early marriage and declaration. It continued to demand these sacrifices for the sake of family, honor, and social stability. The cumulative weight of archaeological evidence reveals a complex cultural landscape where Roman attitudes toward marriage and sexuality were far more nuanced and troubling than the sanitized accounts of ancient historians might suggest. Imagine yourself walking through the restored rooms of the Villa of Mysteries at Pompeii, with the famous frescoes depicting the initiation of young women into the mysteries of marriage. Continue to puzzle and disturb modern viewers with their blend of beauty and violence. These paintings, frozen in time by volcanic ash, speak to cultural attitudes that seem to glorify the very experiences that other archaeological evidence suggests were sources of profound anxiety and trauma for the young women who underwent them. Fresco cycle itself tells a story that moves from innocence through terror to acceptance, following a young woman through the stages of preparation for marriage that include both physical purification and spiritual initiation into the mysteries of sexuality. The central panel, depicting a young woman cowering in terror while a winged figure prepares to strike her with a whip, has been interpreted by scholars as representing the pain and fear that were considered inevitable aspects of the transition from maidenhood to wifehood. The fact that such imagery was considered appropriate decoration for a wealthy Roman home suggests that the suffering of young brides was not only accepted but actively celebrated as a necessary component of the marriage process. The archaeological evidence from domestic contexts throughout the Roman world reveals the existence of what appears to have been a sophisticated cultural framework for managing and ritualizing the trauma associated with wedding nights. The standardization of certain objects and practices across widely separated geographical regions suggests that Romans had developed systematic approaches to preparing young women for experiences that were understood to be inherently traumatic. The ritual implements, pharmaceutical preparations, and religious offerings that have been discovered in archaeological contexts represent the material culture of institutionalized sexual violence, normalized through tradition and sanctified through religious belief. The analysis of skeletal remains from Roman cemeteries has provided modern researchers with disturbing insights into the physical consequences of Roman marriage practices. Studies of pelvic bones from young women who lived during the Imperial period show evidence of trauma that is consistent with forced sexual activity, while the age distribution of these injuries suggests that they occurred primarily during the teenage years, when most Roman women were married. The high rate of mortality among young married women, as evidenced by cemetery populations, points to a correlation between marriage and death that Roman society appears to have accepted as a natural, consequence of female destiny. Recent advances in archaeological science have allowed researchers to extract new types of information from ancient remains that shed additional light on the experiences of Roman brides. Chemical analysis of tooth enamel from skeletal remains can reveal information about stress levels during different periods of life. Studies of Roman women's teeth show significant stress markers that coincide with typical marriage ages. Similarly, analysis of bone chemistry can reveal information about diet and health status, and evidence suggests that many young Roman women experienced significant nutritional stress during their early married years, possibly as a result of pregnancy complications or the general health impacts of traumatic sexual experiences. The preservation of organic materials and waterlogged Roman sites has provided archaeologists with access to textiles and other perishable goods that offer additional insights into the preparation and experience of Roman wedding nights. A collection of silk undergarments discovered in a Roman cemetery in London shows evidence of deliberate bloodstaining that has been carefully preserved through special treatment and storage. The elaborate embroidery on these garments suggests they were created specifically for wedding nights. The presence of blood indicates they were kept as proof of successful defloration. The care with which these items were preserved and buried with their owners suggests that the physical evidence of lost virginity was considered significant enough to accompany women into the afterlife. The discovery of medical instruments in Roman domestic contexts provides additional evidence of the physical trauma that could result from wedding night experiences. A set of bronze forceps discovered in a Roman villa in southern France shows evidence of having been used for gynecological procedures, while the presence of associated materials suggests they were employed to treat injuries resulting from sexual violence. The wear patterns on these instruments indicate regular use, while their storage in lined wooden boxes suggests they were valued tools that were maintained with considerable care. The domestic context of these discoveries suggests that treating wedding night injuries was a common enough occurrence to require specialized stigments in wealthy households. The religious dimensions of Roman wedding night culture are revealed through the analysis of votive offerings discovered at temples throughout the empire. The sheer quantity of offerings related to marriage and sexuality suggests that spiritual preparation was considered essential for surviving these experiences. At the Temple of Venus in Rome, archaeologists have uncovered thousands of small clay figurines representing brides in various poses of supplication, while inscribed tablets reveal prayers that specifically request divine protection during defloration. The consistency of these offerings across different time periods and geographical regions suggests that fear of wedding night trauma was a cultural constant that transcended class and ethnicity. The economic aspects of Roman wedding night culture are revealed through the analysis of commercial workshops and trade networks that specialized in marriage-related goods. The standardization of certain products across different sites indicates that there was sufficient demand to support specialized manufacturing. The quality of materials and craftsmanship suggests that serving the needs of nervous brides was a lucrative business. Price lists preserved on papyrus documents revealed that some wedding night preparations commanded premium prices, indicating that families were willing to invest significant resources in attempts to ease their daughters' ordeals. The legal dimensions of Roman marriage reveal additional layers of institutionalized sexual violence that were considered normal and necessary aspects of the matrimonial system. Legal documents preserved on papyrus and carved in stone established that husbands had unlimited sexual access to their wives, regardless of age or consent, while wives had no legal recourse for sexual violence within marriage. The legal concept of matrimonial debt required wives to submit to their husband's sexual demands as a matter of contractual obligation. while the emphasis on producing heirs created additional pressure for frequent sexual activity, regardless of its physical or emotional consequences for young women. The educational aspects of Roman wedding preparation revealed the systematic nature of cultural indoctrination that prepared young women to accept sexual violence as a normal aspect of married life. Instructional texts preserved on papyrus include detailed advice for brides about how to endure pain during sexual encounters, while medical documents provide guidance for treating the injuries that were expected to result from these experiences. The matter-of-fact tone of these instructional materials suggests that trauma was considered an inevitable and acceptable aspect of the marriage process, rather than an aberration requiring intervention or prevention. The comparative analysis of Roman wedding practices with those of other ancient cultures reveals that the institutionalization of sexual violence was not unique to Roman society. Yet, the systematic and commercial nature of Roman approaches to managing this violence appears to have been unusually sophisticated. The development of specialized pharmaceutical preparations, medical treatments, and religious rituals around wedding night trauma suggest that Romans had created a comprehensive cultural framework for normalizing and managing experiences that modern society would recognize as sexual assault and psychological abuse. In the highest echelons of Roman society, where bloodlines determined the fate of empires and marriage contracts could shift the balance of political power across continents, the wedding night transcended personal experience to become a matter of state importance. Imagine yourself standing in the shadows of the Imperial Palace on the Palatine Hill, where the marble corridors echo with whispered conversations about alliances and succession, and where the private chambers of aristocratic brides serve as stages for dramas that will influence the course of history. Here, in these opulent spaces, where silk hangings from distant China mingled with the scent of Arabian incense, the anxiety of young noble women takes on dimensions that extend far beyond personal fear to encompass the political survival of entire families. The aristocratic Roman bride existed within a complex web of expectations that transformed her wedding night from a private ritual into a public performance, whose success or failure would be scrutinized by networks of political allies and enemies. Her defloration was not merely the loss of her virginity, but the consummation of carefully negotiated treaties between powerful families. It's the physical manifestation of political alliances that had been months or years in the making. The blood that would stain her wedding sheets would serve as proof not only of her purity, but of her family's honor and their commitment to the matrimonial contract that bound their fortunes to those of her husband's clan. The preparation of elite brides involved layers of complexity that distinguished their experiences from those of ordinary Roman women. Teams of specialists attended to every aspect of their transformation. Master cosmeticians who had trained in the techniques favored by Egyptian queens, hairdressers whose skills commanded fees equivalent to a working man's annual salary, and perfumers who blended fragrances according to formulas that were closely guarded family secrets. The clothing worn by these young women represented the finest work of craftsmen from across the empire, with silk threads counted and pearls weighed to ensure that every element of their appearance proclaimed their family's wealth and status. To the witnesses who would observe their progress toward matrimonial consummation, the political dimensions of aristocratic marriage created unique forms of pressure that intensified the already considerable anxieties surrounding wedding nights. The young bride understood that her performance in the marriage chamber would be evaluated not only by her husband, but by the entire network of political relationships that the marriage was intended to cement or strengthen. Her ability to please her husband, to conceive quickly, and to navigate the complex social dynamics of her new household would determine not only her personal happiness, but the political fortunes of everyone whose interests were tied to the success of the matrimonial alliance. The presence of witnesses, whether direct or indirect, added another layer of complexity to aristocratic wedding nights that distinguished them from the private experiences of lower-class couples. While the actual consummation might take place in relative privacy, the events surrounding it were carefully observed and reported by networks of servants, relatives, and political allies whose loyalty to various family members created competing interests in the outcome. The bride's attendants, the groom's companions, and the household servants all served as potential sources of information about the couple's compatibility, performance, and prospects for producing the heirs upon which political calculations depended. The TS, economic stakes involved in aristocratic marriages, created additional pressures that could transform wedding night anxiety into something approaching terror. The dowries exchanged between elite families often represented fortunes that could influence the economic stability of entire regions, while the inheritance rights that will be established through the marriage could determine the distribution of vast estates and commercial enterprises. The bride understood that her failure to consummate the marriage successfully could result in the dissolution of contracts worth millions of sestertii, potentially bankrupting her family and destroying the political alliances that had taken generations to construct. The competitive nature of aristocratic society created additional pressures as families sought to demonstrate their superiority through the magnificence of their matrimonial celebrations and the success of their alliances. The wedding night became a crucial element in these displays of power and sophistication, with families investing enormous resources in creating the perfect environment for their daughter's declaration. Marriage chambers were decorated with artwork, commissioned from the finest artists, furnished with pieces created by master craftsmen, supplied with luxuries imported from the furthest corners of the empire. The bride's trousseau might include dozens of specially commissioned garments, each designed for specific moments in the matrimonial process, and intended to enhance her appeal while demonstrating her family's wealth and taste. The international dimensions of elite Roman marriages added layers of complexity that could transform wedding night preparations into diplomatic events with consequences that extended far beyond the immediate families involved. When marriages were arranged between Roman aristocrats and members of client royal families, the wedding night took on significance as a symbol of Rome's relationship with allied kingdoms and tributary states. The bride's performance was evaluated not only in personal and familial terms, but as a representation of her people's submission to Roman authority and their integration into the imperial system. The religious obligations that accompanied aristocratic marriages created additional forms of pressure that distinguished elite wedding nights from those of ordinary citizens. The bride's family was expected to secure the favor of the gods through elaborate sacrifices and offerings, while the groom's family sought divine blessing for the fertility and prosperity that the marriage was intended to bring. The failure of these religious observances, or the appearance of negative omens during the wedding celebrations, could be interpreted as divine disapproval of the union and might require postponement or even cancellation of the marriage contract. The preservation of family honor through the successful management of aristocratic wedding nights required sophisticated strategies for handling the various complications that might arise. Families maintained networks of physicians, priests, and advisors who could be summoned quickly to address medical emergencies, interpret religious signs, or provide counsel during moments of crisis. The presence of these specialists, while intended to ensure success, added additional layers of observation and potential judgment that could intensify the bride's anxiety about her performance and its consequences. The documentation requirements that accompanied elite marriages recorded permanent records of wedding night events that could be referenced years or decades later during inheritance disputes or political conflicts. Legal scribes recorded the details of consummation, including the testimony of witnesses about the bride's virginity and the successful completion of the sexual act. These documents, preserved in family archives and sometimes copied for deposit in public records, meant that the most intimate moments of a bride's life could become evidence in future legal proceedings or political struggles. The management of aristocratic wedding nights required a level of coordination and planning that rivaled military campaigns, with every detail carefully orchestrated to ensure outcomes that would serve the political and economic interests of the families involved. Imagine yourself observing the preparations in a great Roman villa, where teams of specialists work with the precision of engineers to create the perfect environment for a young woman's declaration. Their efforts guided not by considerations of her comfort or happiness, but by calculations of political advantage and dynastic necessity. The very architecture of these elite residences had been designed to facilitate such events, with marriage chambers positioned to provide both privacy and accessibility to the witnesses whose observations would validate the union's consummation. The selection and training of household staff for aristocratic weddings involved a complex process of vetting and preparation that ensured every person who would be present during the crucial events could be trusted to serve the family's interests. The female attendants who would prepare the bride were chosen not only for their skills in cosmetics and grooming, but for their loyalty, discretion, and ability to provide testimony that would support the family's version of events if questions rose about the marriage's validity. These women, often slaves who had been raised within the household from childhood, understood that their own futures depended upon their successful performance of duties that extended far beyond the merely ceremonial. The preparation of the bride herself involved sophisticated techniques for managing both her physical appearance and her psychological state to maximize the likelihood of a successful wedding night. Master cosmeticians employed methods that had been refined over generations, using imported pigments and rare oils to create an appearance that would appeal to masculine desires, while also conveying the innocence and purity that were essential to her value as a bride. The application of these cosmetics followed protocols that had been developed through careful observation of what pleased wealthy Roman men, with every detail from the color of her lips to the scent of her hair calculated to enhance her attractiveness during the intimate encounters that lay ahead. The pharmaceutical preparations provided to aristocratic brides represented the most sophisticated medical knowledge available in the Roman world, with families investing heavily in substances and treatments that could ease the transition from virginity to married status. Private physicians, often Greeks who had studied in Alexandria or other centers of medical learning, prepared customized combinations of herbs, minerals, and animal products designed to reduce pain, promote relaxation, and enhance the likelihood of conception. These preparations, which might include exotic ingredients imported at enormous expense from India or Africa, were administered according to carefully timed schedules that began days before the wedding and continued through the crucial first weeks of marriage. The psychological preparation of elite brides involved sophisticated forms of conditioning that were designed to ensure their compliance with expectations while minimizing the risk of behavior that might disrupt the wedding night proceedings. Professional instructors, usually older women who had experienced managing the marriages of other aristocratic families, provided training that went far beyond the basic sexual education given to ordinary Roman women. These sessions included detailed instruction in the specific preferences and expectations of the groom, guidance on managing pain and fear during sexual encounters, and strategic advice about how to please powerful men while maintaining the dignity expected of their social position. The creation of detailed backup plans for managing potential complications during aristocratic wedding nights reflected the high stakes involved in the family's determination to ensure successful outcomes regardless of circumstances. Medical specialists were positioned nearby with equipment and medicines for treating injuries that might result from difficult defloration, while religious advisors prepared alternative rituals that could be employed if negative omens threatened to disrupt the proceedings. Legal experts stood ready to address questions about the validity of the marriage if unusual circumstances arose. From political advisors prepared strategies for managing any diplomatic complications that might emerge from wedding night difficulties. The surveillance systems employed during elite wedding nights created an atmosphere of constant observation that extended the public nature of these supposedly private events into the most intimate moments of the couple's encounter. Networks of trusted servants positioned throughout the residence monitored sounds, timing, and other indicators that would provide evidence of successful consummation, while family members maintained vigils in adjacent rooms to ensure their ability to respond quickly to any developments that might require intervention. The bride understood that her every movement, sound, and reaction was being observed and evaluated by people whose loyalty to her family's interests might conflict with concern for her personal well-being. The documentation processes that accompanied aristocratic wedding nights created permanent records that served multiple purposes within the complex legal and political systems that governed elite Roman society. Professional scribes prepared detailed accounts of the evening's events, including testimony from witnesses about the bride's virginity, descriptions of the consummation process, and certification of its successful completion. These documents, written on the finest papyrus and sealed with family emblems, would be preserved in multiple copies and deposited in various archives to ensure their availability for future reference during inheritance disputes, political conflicts, or marriage annulment proceedings. The management of information explode about aristocratic wedding nights required sophisticated strategies for controlling which details became public knowledge and which remained within the family's inner circle. Professional reputation managers, often freedmen who had demonstrated exceptional loyalty and discretion, coordinated the release of information that would enhance the family's political standing while suppressing details that might be used by rivals or enemies. The timing and content of announcements about successful consummation were carefully calculated to maximize political advantage, while negative information was contained through a combination of financial incentives, legal threats, and social pressure. The international dimensions of elite Roman marriages required additional layers of planning and coordination that transformed wedding nights into diplomatic events with implications that extended far beyond the immediate families involved. When marriages involved alliances with client kingdoms or tributary states, special protocols were developed to ensure that the wedding night proceedings would satisfy the expectations of multiple cultures while maintaining Roman supremacy in the relationship. Interpreters, cultural advisors, and diplomatic observers might be present to ensure that the union was properly understood and accepted by all parties, creating an atmosphere of international scrutiny that added to the pressure already facing the young bride. The competitive dynamics between aristocratic families created additional motivations for elaborate wedding night preparations that served to demonstrate wealth, sophistication, and political influence to rival clans. Families invested enormous resources in creating marriage chambers that would surpass those of their competitors in luxury and elegance, commissioning artwork, furniture, and decorative elements that proclaimed their superiority to anyone who might learn details about their wedding arrangements. The bride's trousseau became a vehicle for displaying the family's international connections and cultural refinement, with items selected not only for their beauty and functionality, but for their ability to convey messages about the family's status and aspirations. The stark contrasts between aristocratic and ordinary Roman wedding experiences revealed the profound ways in which social class could transform even the most fundamental human experiences into radically different realities. Imagine yourself moving between two different worlds within the same city, from the marble-columned villa of a senatorial family, where teams of specialists orchestrate every detail of a young woman's defloration, to the modest apartment of a shopkeeper's family, where a bride's wedding night unfolds with little ceremony beyond the basic requirements of Roman law and tradition. The distance between these experiences encompasses not merely differences in luxury and comfort, but fundamental variations in agency, support, and the very meaning attributed to the transformation from maiden to wife. The ordinary Roman bride, daughter of a craftsman or small merchant, approached her wedding night with anxieties that were both similar to and profoundly different from those experienced by her aristocratic counterparts, while she too faced the universal fears associated with sexual initiation and the loss of her childhood identity. Her experience was shaped by economic realities that created both constraints and freedoms unknown to wealthy women. Her family's limited resources meant that elaborate preparations were impossible. Yet this same limitation freed her from the complex political calculations and surveillance networks that made aristocratic wedding nights into public performances with international implications. The preparation rituals available to middle-class and lower-class Roman brides reflected the practical realities of families who could not afford teams of specialists or exotic pharmaceutical preparations. The bride's mother and female relatives provided what guidance they could, drawing upon their own experiences and the accumulated wisdom of their social circle rather than the professional expertise available to wealthy families. The cosmetics applied to enhance her appearance were locally produced rather than imported from distant lands, while the oils and perfumes that scented her skin came from neighborhood markets rather than royal suppliers. Yet these simpler preparations, applied with the love and care of family members rather than the calculated efficiency of hired professionals, might provide forms of emotional support that were often absent from the more elaborate rituals of the elite. The economic pressures that shaped ordinary Roman marriages created different types of anxiety around wedding night performance, as families who depended upon their own labor for survival could not afford the luxury of extended recovery periods or elaborate post-wedding care. The bride understood that she would be expected to resume her household duties almost immediately after her wedding night, regardless of any physical or emotional trauma she might experience. The absence of servants to manage domestic responsibilities meant that her own productivity was essential to the family's economic survival, creating pressure to minimize any disruption that might result from difficult marital initiation. The social networks available to ordinary Roman women provided forms of support that could sometimes compensate for their lack of professional medical and psychological resources. Neighborhood communities of women who had shared similar experiences created informal systems of advice, assistance, and emotional support that helped young brides navigate the challenges of early marriage. The midwives, herbalists, and wise women who served these communities often possessed practical knowledge about managing wedding night trauma and its aftermath, knowledge that had been passed down through generations of women who had learned to cope with limited resources and social constraints. The legal protections available to Roman women varied significantly according to their social class, creating different landscapes of risk and opportunity around wedding night experiences. While aristocratic women might enjoy some protection through their family's political influence and financial resources, ordinary women often found themselves completely dependent upon their husbands' goodwill and the informal social controls of their communities. The absence of powerful advocates meant that ordinary women who experienced severe wedding night trauma had limited recourse, yet the close-knit nature of their communities sometimes provided forms of protection and support that were unavailable to isolated elite women. The religious resources accessible to different classes of Roman women reflected broader patterns of social stratification that influenced every aspect of their lives, including their spiritual preparation for marriage. While wealthy families could afford private temples, professional priests, and elaborate sacrificial offerings, ordinary families relied upon public temples, neighborhood shrines, and simple offerings that reflected their limited means. Yet the sincerity of their religious observances was unfiltered by the political calculations that often motivated elite religious practices, might provide forms of spiritual comfort that were more genuine and emotionally sustaining than the elaborate but calculated rituals of the wealthy. The contrast between elite and ordinary Roman approaches to wedding night medical care reveals the profound ways in which social class could determine access to basic human compassion and professional expertise, while aristocratic families maintained relationships with skilled physicians who could provide sophisticated treatments for wedding night complications. Ordinary families relied upon local healers whose training might be limited, but whose personal investment in their patients' welfare was often genuine. The herbal remedies and folk treatments available to poor women might be less scientifically advanced than the preparations used by the wealthy. Yet, they were often administered with a level of care and concern that reflected genuine human sympathy rather than professional obligation. The different expectations placed upon brides from various social classes created contrasting forms of pressure that shaped their wedding night experiences in fundamental ways. Elite women faced demands for sophisticated performance that included not only sexual compliance, but a demonstration of cultural accomplishments, political awareness, social grace that reflected their family's investments in their education and preparation. Ordinary women confronted simpler, but perhaps more immediate pressures related to fertility, domestic productivity, and their ability to contribute to their family's economic survival through their own labor and eventual childbearing. The privacy available to couples from different social backgrounds created vastly different contexts for their initial intimate encounters, with implications that extended far beyond mere comfort or embarrassment. Aristocratic couples might enjoy elaborate private chambers designed specifically for their wedding nights. Yet these same spaces were often subject to forms of surveillance and documentation that made true privacy impossible. Ordinary couples frequently faced the challenge of consummating their marriages in cramped quarters that offered little privacy from family members or neighbors. Yet their lack of political significance often protected them from the systematic observation that characterized elite wedding nights. The long-term trajectories of marriages, begun under such different circumstances, reflected the ongoing influence of social class on every aspect of Roman family life. Elite women who survived their wedding night trauma often found themselves trapped in marriages that were maintained primarily for political and economic reasons, with little regard for their personal happiness or emotional well-being. Their access to luxury and comfort could not compensate for the fundamental lack of agency that characterized their lives. Their continued value to their families depended upon their successful performance of roles that had been determined without their input or consent. As our journey through the marble corridors and shadowed chambers of ancient Rome draws to its close, we find ourselves returning to the present moment with a deeper understanding of the complex realities that lay hidden beneath the polished surface of Roman civilization. The young women whose stories we have followed, from the trembling bride in her father's villa to the imperial princess facing her dynastic destiny, from the anxious teenager clutching protective amulets to the ordinary merchant's daughter preparing for an uncertain future, speak to us across nearly 2 millennia with voices that remain remarkably human despite the vast cultural distances that separate their world from our own. The wedding nights we have explored reveal truths about Roman society that extend far beyond the intimate chambers where these transformative moments unfolded. Through the lens of matrimonial anxiety and sexual trauma, we glimpse a civilization that was simultaneously sophisticated and brutal, capable of extraordinary artistic and intellectual achievements, while maintaining social systems that routinely sacrificed individual welfare to collective advantage. The archaeological evidence of hidden prayers in pharmaceutical preparations, the documentation of elaborate surveillance networks and political calculations, the testimony of legal codes and medical treatises, all of these sources combine to paint a picture of a society that understood the human cost of its institutions, yet remained committed to preserving them for the sake of stability and power. The contrast between public celebration and private suffering that characterized Roman weddings reflects broader patterns of social organization that prioritized appearance over reality, collective benefit over individual welfare, and political necessity over human compassion. The elaborate ceremonies that marked these unions, with their religious rituals and festive celebrations, served to obscure the often dramatic realities that awaited young brides behind closed doors. The very magnificence of Roman wedding traditions, with their processions and pageantry, created a cultural smokescreen that made it possible for society to ignore or minimize the psychological and physical violence that was endemic to their matrimonial system. Yet, within this system of institutionalized suffering, we have also discovered evidence of remarkable resilience, creativity, and mutual support among the women who were its primary victims. The networks of feminine solidarity that provided emotional and practical assistance to nervous brides. The informal medical knowledge passed down through generations of mothers and midwives. The religious practices that offered spiritual comfort in the face of inevitable trauma. These elements of Roman women's culture represent forms of resistance and adaptation that enabled survival under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. The archaeological record speaks with particular eloquence about the ways that Roman women found methods for preserving their dignity and agency, even within systems designed to eliminate both. The hidden caches of personal possessions discovered in Roman homes. The private prayers inscribed on tablets and buried beneath floorboards. The modifications made to household spaces to create zones of feminine privacy and control. All of these discoveries suggest that Roman women were not passive victims of their circumstances, but active agents who found ways to maintain elements of selfhood and independence despite the constraints imposed upon them. The medical and pharmaceutical evidence revealed another dimension of Roman women's resourcefulness. They developed and maintained sophisticated knowledge about managing the physical and emotional challenges of married life. The herbal preparations found in Roman archaeological contexts, specialized instruments discovered in domestic settings, the detailed medical texts that address feminine health concerns. These materials suggest that Roman women created their own systems of healthcare and mutual support that operated parallel to the official medical establishment dominated by male physicians and male perspectives. The religious dimensions of Roman wedding night culture provide insight into the spiritual resources that women drew upon to find meaning and comfort in their experiences. The thousands of votive offerings discovered at temples throughout the Roman world, the private altars maintained in domestic settings, the syncretic practices that combined Roman religious traditions with local customs and beliefs. All of these elements suggest that Roman women maintained rich spiritual lives that provided psychological resources for coping with trauma and finding purpose in suffering. The international and cross-cultural aspects of Roman marriage practices remind us that the experiences we have explored were not unique to Roman society, but reflected broader patterns of gender relations and power dynamics that characterized the ancient world. The similarities between Roman wedding night customs and those documented in other ancient civilizations suggest that the institutionalization of sexual violence within marriage was a widespread phenomenon that transcended cultural boundaries. Yet the specific ways that Roman society organized and managed these practices through legal codification, commercial exploitation, and political manipulation reveal distinctive features that illuminate the particular character of Roman civilization. The class-based differences we have examined in Roman wedding night experiences provide insight into the ways that social stratification could transform even the most fundamental human experiences into radically different realities. The contrast between the elaborate surveillance networks that monitored aristocratic wedding nights and the relative privacy available to ordinary couples, between the sophisticated pharmaceutical preparations available to wealthy brides and the folk remedies used by poor women, between the political calculations that shaped elite marriages and the economic necessities that governed ordinary unions. These differences remind us that privilege and wealth could create their own forms of suffering, even while providing access to resources and opportunities unavailable to the less fortunate. The long-term consequences of Roman wedding night practices extended far beyond the immediate experiences of individual brides to shape broader patterns of family life, political organization, and cultural development throughout the empire. The psychological trauma that characterized so many Roman marriages contributed to cycles of dysfunction and abuse that were transmitted across generations, while the political alliances forged through matrimonial contracts influenced the distribution of power and resources throughout Roman society. The normalization of sexual violence within marriage created cultural attitudes that affected not only intimate relationships, but broader social policies related to law, education, and public morality. The courage and resilience demonstrated by Roman women in the face of these systematic challenges offers lessons that remain relevant to contemporary discussions about gender, power, and human dignity. Their strategies for survival and adaptation, their methods for maintaining relationships and finding meaning in difficult circumstances, their techniques for preserving elements of agency and self-determination within oppressive systems. These examples of human resourcefulness continue to inspire and inform modern efforts to address similar challenges in different cultural contexts as we settle back into the comfort of our modern lives, with their legal protections and social supports that Roman women could never have imagined. We carry with us the memory of those ancient voices that spoke to us from clay tablets and carved stones, from hidden caches of personal possessions and carefully preserved textile fragments. Their experiences remind us that the progress we take for granted was achieved through centuries of struggle and sacrifice, and that the freedoms we enjoy were purchased through the suffering of countless individuals whose names history has forgotten, but whose courage archaeology continues to reveal. The Roman wedding night, with all its complexity and contradiction, its beauty and brutality, its public celebration and private anguish, serves as a window into both the heights and depths of human civilization. Through understanding these ancient experiences, we gain insight not only into the past, but into the ongoing challenges of creating societies that honor human dignity while maintaining social stability, that celebrate love and partnership while acknowledging the realities of power and inequality, that preserve valuable traditions while eliminating practices that cause unnecessary suffering. In the quiet darkness of our own safe spaces, surrounded by the protections and comforts that separate our world from theirs, we can honor the memory of those ancient brides by remembering their stories, acknowledging their courage, and committing ourselves to building a future where young women can approach marriage with joy rather than fear, with anticipation rather than dread, and with confidence that their dignity and welfare will be protected by the very institutions that once demanded their sacrifice. The analysis of household refuse from Roman archaeological sites reveals additional information about the daily realities of married life for women who had survived traumatic wedding nights. The presence of large quantities of pharmaceutical waste suggests that ongoing medical treatment was required for many young wives, while the composition of food remains indicates dietary modifications that may have been designed to address nutritional deficiencies resulting from pregnancy complications or general health problems related to sexual trauma. The discovery of hidden caches of personal possessions suggests that some women develop strategies for maintaining elements of independence and privacy within marriages that otherwise offered them little autonomy or protection.